Okay, it's Wednesday the 4th, 2 days after the new moon. I have maybe 2 days, tonight and tomorrow night, to wrap up whatever deep sky imaging I want to do with without any moon wash whatsoever. What I have before me right now is a sat clock. Unfortunately, the Gemini 2 mount is not able to get in touch with a GPS clock, so I have to, every once in a while, pull the one out of the bedroom, and then I have to synchronize. So let me do that now. First step to synchronization after turning on the power on the Gemini 2 is press warm restart, since it'll load up all the model data, which is very good to the east and terrible to the west, and maybe part of that is the time. Then I noticed the time. On the sat clock, right now 25 mark, it's 7 seconds behind the Los Van time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press menu, time, and I'm going to set it when the sat clock gets to 44 set. Okay, they're now synchronized. Then I'm going to park in the position I left in, which is clock counterweight down, and you notice, I don't think you saw it, but there was a slight repositioning of the mount. So that may have been a factor in the lack of accuracy to the west. Tonight I may have some westering studies around 9:30 in the evening. I'll start with NGC 6714, I believe is where I left off last night, and I hope to get through the rest of the NGC series of globular clusters up to 7,000 plus. So that is the plan. Well, even though the sun hasn't quite set, Vega being, I think it's 0.1 magnitudes or so, is accessible through the finder scope and through the main telescope if I really relax the shutter speed. I mean, really tighten it up, 1/4000th of a second. Now notice, we got a bit of a donut with Vega right now. Clearly the focus is off. So here is the only time I can set the focus is when I'm operating a very fast shutter speed. So there is tightest focus. And that can seriously be a problem, especially with globular clusters. So I'm glad I had a chance to reset it. I'll have to check it again later because there could be thermal changes in the optical tube assembly. Okay, it's now 8:30. Temperatures have cooled off a little bit. I'm going to see if the focus has been shifted on the scope due to temperature. One side of focus, outside I believe, inside no, I'd say it's pretty stable. Very good. I'm now going to drive the scope to NGC 6714 and we'll see if it's to the east or the western facing traverse of the mount. Well, here we have a surprisingly good early evening pre-sky dark view. I can see some color in the sky of NGC 6712, our kickoff study of the evening. Globular cluster in Scutum. Brightish, magnitude 8.2, 4.3 arc minutes in apparent size. The brightest stars are 13.3 and we be seeing them. This is a class 9 globular, 22,000 light years distant. A little closer than Messier 13, the great Hercules cluster. And however, it is about 1/5 the apparent size, so fairly small. We're right ascension 1853.04, declination -8 degrees, 42 minutes and 19 seconds. I have to tell you, there will be issues with the scope because that right ascension 1853.04 is just culminatory at this hour, which happens to be 8:38 and 35 seconds in the evening. based on GMT time. Or should it? Yeah. Or actually, okay. Actually, it is 7:38:53 GMT time, since I do not adjust the handset. That's a very decent view of NGC 6712. A little fuzzy, however. Just a few minutes later, and we still haven't achieved skydark after looking at 6712. And here's that kickoff view of the Ring Nebula Messier 57. It'll probably be another 20 minutes or so before I come out and begin with NGC 6712 again, with the scope now having done an equatorial flip. I suspect during the course of the evening I will have to also do a flip back to the east in order to be able to go, potentially complete the entire series of studies, ending with NGC 7000 plus, which is a globular cluster. I think it's 7014, but I could be mistaken. But there's a pretty fine view of the ring. With the summer triangle high overhead, Vega just post-cometary, Altair further to the south and the east, and Deneb trailing it to the northeast. We are now getting a look at NGC 6712, globular cluster in Scutum, magnitude 8.2, 4.3 arc minutes. Brightest stars are magnitude 13.3. It's a class 9, 22,000 light years distant, and you knew this already because it was the study that we last looked at before the Ring Nebula, but it was about a half an hour earlier when the scope was oriented towards the east rather than the west. So, 6712, let's move on from here. Just spent the last 10 minutes doing a 5-point realignment to the west. I had no confidence whatsoever anything I was going to look for was going to turn up in the screen without some manipulation. So here we are at NGC 6717, globular cluster in Sagittarius, magnitude 8.4, smallish 3.9 arc minutes. Its brightest stars are magnitude 14. It's a class 8, 23,000 light years distant. We're at right ascension 1855.06, declination minus 2242.05. Let's push onward and upward, and hopefully things will fall in with confidence. We're about to have our confidence in the new model severely tested, because we're now searching for NGC 6749, a globular cluster in Aquila, magnitude 12.4 and largish 6.3 arc minutes, meaning the average surface brightness on this is going to be somewhere around magnitude 16, and its very brightest stars are magnitude 16.5. If this one gives any hint of its presence, I will be very pleased with that, although I could not guarantee it. My viewing angle is very poor. We are at right ascension 1905.15, declination 1 degree 54 minutes and 2 seconds above the celestial equator, so it's not in very bad sky position to get a view on a very decent night of viewing where the smoke has dissipated from a fire that occurred several days back here in the John Day Valley. Confidence restored in the new model. We are now seeing NGC 6760 on the screen. Globular cluster Aquila, magnitude 9.1, 2.4 arc minutes in size. If we're resolving any stars, they'll be of magnitude 15.6. It's a class 9, 24,000 light years distant. Right ascension 1911.11, declination 0.01 degrees, 1 minute and 49 seconds. Keep in mind, once again, we are operating at 64 flood, 42 decibels of gain, 6 passes, and we should be able to replicate viewing results except for the aesthetics of about a 12-inch telescope. Nice view. Very comforting. And we actually got it to fall in on the screen where we would expect it to. Here we have NGC 6779, excuse me, Globular Cluster in Lyra, otherwise known as, drumroll please, Messier 56, magnitude 8.35 arc minutes in size. The brightest stars are magnitude 15, and I have seen about a half dozen or so of them through at the eyepiece of a 6-inch Maxitov Cassegrain. This is a class 10, 32,000 light years distant. We're at right ascension 19, 16, 35, declination 30 plus 30 degrees, 11 minutes and 1 second. Yes, it has drifted off a bit to the right. Other globulars further south were here, but given the fact we're operating 150x, that's probably no more than 3 arc minutes. Not bad. Well, tolerable anyway. Here we have a nice presentation, NGC 6838 Globular Cluster. I believe it's Sagitta. It's also known as Messier 71, magnitude 8.3, 6.1 arc minutes. We're seeing a little more resolution than we saw in Messier 56 because its brightest stars are almost 1 magnitude brighter, at magnitude 12.1. And the reason we're seeing them brighter is because this is a mere 12,000 light years distant. We're at right ascension 1953.46, declination plus 18 degrees 46 minutes and 41 seconds. Does look like I could push that cluster down a little bit further on the screen and to the left, and I will do that, and I will add it to maybe I should add it to the model given the fact we're already 15 minutes into viewing and there is some drift. I did in fact add NGC 6838 to the model. I just made a minor adjustment to its position. Let's see how it turns out when we go to our next globular cluster, which is as yet to be determined because I am basically stepping through the Gemini 2 data set for the NGC catalog. This should be the final western equatorial flip view of the evening. The scope is definitely decidedly looking to the east of culmination. I will flip the scope around, and it's a great view. It is NGC 6864 Globular Cluster in Sagittarius, also known as Messier 75, 8.6 magnitude, 6 arc minutes in size. The brightest stars, if they are resolvable, are magnitude 14.6. This baby is a class 1 globular, dense and packed with stars, some 60,000 light years distant. However, it would still be a bit smaller than the Great Hercules cluster. The Hercules cluster is probably somewhere around 175 light years in diameter, but what an intense view. Very nice and well positioned on the screen. And we are fairly south. Once again, right ascension 20 hours, 6 minutes, 04 seconds, minus 21 degrees, 55 minutes and 18 seconds. I now have confidence that our west-looking face of the Losmandy Gemini 2 mount is finally hitting its stride, despite the fact there are distortions in the model set due to some mechanical misalignment. Let's flip to the east. Okay, now that we are flipped back to look to the east, I can go deep to the south. I picked out NGC 6809. NGC 6809, we're fetching the data now, is also known as Messier 55. It's a beautiful cluster at half the power because it looks like a 5-pointed star. I don't know that that particular more shape will turn up quite as nicely. NGC 6809, Globular Cluster Sagittarius. Messier 55 is very bright, magnitude 6.3, quite large, 19 arc minutes. Brightest stars are magnitude 11.2. It is a class 11, excuse me, 17,000 light years distant. However, it suffers from being a declination of minus 30 degrees, 57 minutes and 44 seconds, has a right ascension of 19 hours, 39:59. So we've headed back a bit to the west in order to capture some of these deep studies that otherwise would have been missed. There's our view. Here we have another view of NGC 6838. I will repeat the data as soon as I can fetch it. This is a view from the east. And I would point out that anything above is south and anything below is north. Anything to, as I recall, anything to this side of the screen is reversed, so this would be east, and this is the west, if I do remember. As you see, 6838, once again, globular cluster in Sagittarius, Messier 71, brightish, magnitude 8.3, 6.1 arc minutes, brightest stars are magnitude 12.1. It is 12,000 light years distant. The right ascension, 1953.46. Declination 1846.41. What you're seeing now is NGC 6864. Very small, tight, bright globular cluster with looks like resolved stars out in its perimeter. This is also known as Messier 75. It's a globular cluster in Sagittarius, magnitude 8.6, 6 arc minutes in size. The stars should be resolvable, magnitude 14.6. It's a class 1, 60,000 light years distant. We're at right ascension 20, 0604, declination minus 2155.18, and getting a very good view against a nice dark background sky. This is actually quite a decent night to get out and observe, even though it's 2 nights after the new moon. I have to tell you, I'm doing some serious skipping along here. Oh, I just found one. There are far more galaxies in the summer Milky Way sky than there are globular clusters. I just turned up NGC 6934 in Delphinus. Let's go there next. Well, I'm not seeing any real sign of NGC 6934 globular cluster in Delphinus. So what I'm going to do is recenter on Altair, maybe a couple more stars, and maybe even start over again with a model for the evening. All the clusters we're looking for now are not quite culminating, so I do have some time to do that. Why not? See if I can't have a little more confidence in the go-to accuracy. Remember, we are operating at 150x, so we only have about a 10 arc minutes field, so things can easily be incorrectly added to the database or just simply not be acquired. Well, quite intriguing. When I added the last globular cluster to the model, it really whacked everything out, and I could not even find Altair on the screen, although I saw it go whizzing by. So I removed it, the last argument, and Altair centered well, and so did NGC 6934, globular cluster in Delphinus, magnitude 8.9, 7 arc minutes in size, with the brightest stars and magnitude 13.8. This is a class 8 globular cluster, 50,000 light years distant. Pretty bright for a class 8 at that distance, I would think. Right ascension 20 hour, 34 minutes and 11 seconds, with a declination 7 degrees, 24 minutes and 16 seconds above the celestial equator. And there is our view. Here we have a rather faint but largish NGC 6981 globular cluster in Aquarius. Also known as Messier 72, it's hard to believe they picked this out with their 3-inch non-achromatic refractor in the late 1700s. M72 is magnitude 9.2, 5.9 arc minutes in size, but its brightest stars are magnitude 14.2. It is a Class 9, 55,000 light-years distant. Right ascension 2053.27, declination 12 degrees, 32 minutes, and 14 seconds below the celestial equator. And that be our view. What we're seeing here is NGC 7006. And what kind of deep sky study is it? A globular cluster. Fairly far north above the equator. It's in Delphinus. Faintish, magnitude 10.6, smallish 2.8 arc minutes. Brightest stars are magnitude 15.6. This is Class 1. I've mentioned this one before. 133,000 light years distant. Lies well beyond the bounds of the Milky Way galaxy. This baby is an intergalactic wanderer looking for a new galactic home. And we'll see in about 5 billion years. It's at right ascension 21 hours, 1 minute and 29 seconds, declination 16:11:14. We're now up to 7,000. The scope is close to culminating. I think I'll push all the way to the 7,100 this evening, and we'll call everything up to 7,100 late summer globular clusters. Folks, we didn't quite get to NGC 7100, nor do we need to do so, because we have now called up what I would consider the very first globular cluster of fall, which, by the way, is some 15 or a couple of weeks away. This is NGC 7078. It's a globular cluster in Pegasus, otherwise known as Messier 15, a very spectacular representation of a globular cluster. Magnitude 6.4, about half the size of the Great Hercules cluster. This one's at 12 arc minutes and 12.3 arc minutes. The brightest stars, which are well seen on the screen, are magnitude 12.6 and should be viewable through a 4-inch scope. It's a Class 4, which means a more condensed version of a globular, 33,000 light years distant. Right ascension 21:29:58, declination plus 12 degrees, 10 minutes and 1 second. A very fine view. And the last of the globular clusters that we will turn up this evening. So what I'm going to do, hopefully, if a certain planetary nebula is not going to cause my scope to equatorially flip, then what we will do is go out on that. Otherwise, carpe noctem. Do you see the Dumbbell Nebula? I don't see the Dumbbell Nebula. There's a faint speckling up here on the screen. However, we're getting a serious amount of aperture block. We have gone post-culminatory, and I'd say we've lost at minimum 60% of the aperture to capture light. So at 150x, we're asking a little too much of the scope to reveal the Dumbbell Planetary Nebula in all of its glory. Let me scope around for something else we just might want to go out on. Here we have another, like Messier 15, doubled it, Messier 30, another of the early fall globular clusters. Messier 30, it's in Capricorn, magnitude 6.9, 8.9 arc minutes in size, some 26,100 light years distant. It's about 2/5 the size of a similar of Messier 13, Great Hercules cluster in terms of apparent size, and roughly the same distance. We are at right ascension 21 hours 40 minutes and 22 seconds, declination minus 23 degrees 10 and 45. And I think I mentioned, ooh, boy, it's getting a lot of atmospheric wash, isn't it? At least from my perspective. I do believe I mentioned the fact that the right ascension position of deep sky studies begins, I believe, at some point in the past. I think it was the year 2000, adjusted now, at the time of the winter solstice, a 0 hour. So if you progress through the seasons, and you got 4 seasons in 24 hours, 0 to 6 would be the winter. Hours 6 to 12 would be the spring. Hours 12 to 18 would be summer. And hours 18 to 24 would be the fall. Well, it just so happens that the days are longer and shorter, which means it either pushes back or compresses the hours in which you can actually observe at astronomical dusk and dawn, if you happen to want to get up early in the morning. So what we've just done over the last 3 videos is covered globular clusters that present themselves at a time of night of sky dark during the summer observing season. And I can remember when summer nights were at their shortest and days were the longest, that I would have to get out at 10:15 to 10:30 at night just to get a dark sky. Well, it's now a couple of months later, and the dark sky is occurring around 9:15, so we've shaved about an hour off of it, because the sun is rising later and setting earlier. So there we go. This and Messier 15 are well placed in the sky for those who wish to observe earlier and earlier in the evening during the early fall. Carpe Noctem.